the truth about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower, part 9 of the 10-part series. And this is answers to every question you may have and questions that you need to be asking. I'm going to whip through this one pretty quickly because I know it's not going to be a major area of interest for those who are not Jehovah's Witnesses presently. I'm going to try to get through it very quickly. So United Nations, were they an ally or an enemy of the Watchtower, a friend or a foe? And what is an NGO? An NGO is a non-governmental organization as a member of the United Nations. So is it true that the Watchtower was secretly an NGO for nearly a decade? Yes. And we're going to talk really quickly in this video, as quick as I can, about why this matters. There was a very big scandal, an NGO scandal, between the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Watchtower and the United Nations. And here's why it was a scandal. Because throughout time, the Watchtower and the Jehovah's Witnesses have broadcasted and publicized to their entire network that the United Nations, they are the scarlet whore and harlot beast of Babylon, that they are the living representation of Satan's rule on this earth, and that they will be destroyed in Armageddon. They see the United Nations as their biggest physical enemy on the earth through history and their publications, speaking of it always very negatively, calling it a scarlet whore, a beast, and many other negative things and derogatory things. But very clearly, it is an agent of Satan in all of their writings. And gradually over time, they have started singing a different tune about the United Nations and just increasing their hypocrisy over matters that they considered to be great spiritual significance, like anybody that would shake hands with the United Nations. To the Jehovah's Witnesses, they spoke of them as being equal to Satan. They spoke very negatively of all of the other NGOs, like the Catholic Church and so on and so forth. So their hypocrisy in this whole thing is really dumbfounding, because the Watchtower professes to be in complete opposition to the United Nations, but then they went and shook hands with them and had this 9-year relationship with them. And as you see, if you go back in history, and you can go on to jw.org to see this, they went from speaking very negatively of them, like they're going to be all burned up and horrible things are coming their way, to actually taking their information and publishing it in a very favorable light within their own publications, like Awake and stuff like that. So this United Nations NGO scandal was brought to light in the 2001 Guardian newspaper, where they revealed that the JWs have had no qualms with having intimate collaboration with the United Nations by becoming an NGO for the Department of Information that took place between 1992 and 2001. This was about a 9-year affiliation that came to an end as a result of the Guardian paper leak. Now, within moments of them broadcasting to the world this relationship, instantly Watchtower shut it down and canceled their affiliation. The United Nations is a global organization that seeks to unify the world and gain a world peace for all, bringing all these countries together. But the Watchtower has always stood very much against that in all of their writings, saying it's the work of Satan. Have nothing to do with it. And if you do have anything to do with it, you will be disfellowshipped. If you have anything to do with any political type of organization. You will be disfellowshipped. You're not even allowed to be a member of the YMCA, things like that. So who do the JWs profess? No, I'm going to skip that part. What they profess is that the United Nations are a sinister, satanic organization with influence over all of the world leaders. And so if any individual or organization are in any way affiliated with the United Nations, they are going to have the same fate that the United Nations will have, which is they will be tortured and burned up in Armageddon. And so what's really interesting about this now is they, throughout all of history, painted this message. Then all of a sudden, when they developed this relationship with the United Nations, they started totally singing a different tune about them and actually copying segments of the United Nations articles and taking information from their website and publishing it in a very favorable light within their own publications like Awake and stuff like that. So it's very interesting the way that their teachings have changed as their political agenda has changed over the years. So we're going to take a look at their literature in a little bit here and how they refer to the United Nations as the Scarlet Beast of Revelation, the book of Revelation in the Bible. They really consider this organization to be the greatest living abomination to God. And that's why I'm doing this video, is that if they can change their minds so quickly for their own political agenda about their number one enemy, and all of a sudden they're going to bed now with their number one enemy, shaking hands with their number one enemy, how can you believe a word that they say? They're really taking this enemy of God and advertising their resume in their publications like they are this noble, helpful, useful organization, humanitarian organization that are, so lovely. And I'm going to show you evidence of that. This is taken from the Revelation Climax book, another thing that the Jehovah's Witnesses author. The UN is actually a blasphemous counterfeit of God's messianic kingdom by his Prince of Peace. Now, as God's only true people on earth, it would seem absurd for them to embark in the sort of partnership with the United Nations when at the same time they're considering the UN to be this blasphemous counterfeit of God's messianic kingdom. And that's exactly what they say in this Revelation Climax book. So it would be a great sign of hypocrisy to be considering that countless people over the years have laid, and still to this day are laying, their life down for their beliefs under the direction of the Jehovah's Witnesses, when they're instructed to have nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with the army, nothing to do with war, and you can't even pledge allegiance in the countries where if you don't pledge allegiance to that ruler, you will be, killed. They're not allowed to do that. But here we have the Jehovah's Witnesses allowed to get into bed with the United Nations void of any consequence. It's interesting how the leadership are allowed to do whatever they want, but the members are persecuted and must lay their lives down as a martyr instead of even take a piece of ID in countries like Malawi and such, where it's required by law to do so. It's very interesting. On October 8th, 2001, this Guardian newspaper opened the eyes of many people on a global scale, about 130,000 in the UK alone, and countless Jehovah's Witnesses' eyes were open to this entire thing that took place behind their backs. Despite the Watchtower's black and white anti-UN teachings, there is countless evidence, including their own admission, that they were registered with the UN as a non-governmental organization via the Department of Public Information. The United Nations confirmed in a letter dated October 11th, 2001, that in 1992 the Watchtower truly was granted their request for association, which included the Watchtower's allegiance to supporting the United Nations principles, programs, and constituents. They had to sign stating that they would be an agent of the United Nations missions, meaning they had to publish information in support of what the United Nations are all about. They had to not just say, hey, okay, yeah, I'll do it. They had to actually on a yearly basis provide reports and evidence showing how they were spreading their message to their people. That was part of the agreement. And of course, like I said, Watchtower terminated this 9-year association in October 2001, which happened to be within about 24 hours to 48 hours or so of the affiliation being discovered. Watchtower immediately washed its hands of the entire matter, and this U-turn, in my opinion, speaks volumes as to the gross hypocrisy of which they had practiced in this choice to be affiliated with this group that they considered to be God's number one enemy on this earth, apart from Satan himself. There is yet to be found any public explanation for this. They have tried to come up with all kinds of stories about why they did this, that they needed to be an NGO to access information in the libraries, but it's all BS because all of that information was publicly accessible. So that's not true. And let's just say it was true. Why were they actually fulfilling their end of the deal by publishing all of this information in light of and in support of the United Nations all of a sudden, when for many, many, many decades they were the number one enemy of the Jehovah's Witnesses, the number one enemy of God? There was a very clear turn of events that you could see unfolding if you watched and read their literature over the years, especially during this 9-year joint relationship they had with them. So what ended up happening is when they were caught and people started questioning by the thousands and thousands and thousands, here's what they said. They stated that once they discovered language of which they could not in good conscience subscribe to, and it was brought to their attention, they immediately withdrew their registration. So basically what they're trying to say is they didn't realize that part of their job description was that they had to represent the United Nations. But once they realized that they were maybe more affiliated with the United Nations than they intended, they withdrew their application, or they withdrew their membership. That's total insanity. It's nonsense. That's not... Anybody buying that needs to give their brains a shake. Because all you have to do is look in their magazines and you will see full pages that are specifically dedicated to the mission and the work of the United Nations. Whole pages broadcasting their message in a very, very, very positive light, basically doing all this advertising for them. So the issue here again is that those that brought light to the matter are, of course, now the Watchtower and Jehovah's Witnesses and God's enemies, because as the Watchtower started, responding to all these allegations, were they actual? Was there any validity? Was there any accountability? No. All of those accusers were, of course, opposers. Anytime light is shone in any area of the Watchtower's wrongdoing, it's never truth, it's always lies of the opposers. So they talk about how the opposers are basically planting seeds of doubt, so that way Satan can pull away as many people as he possibly can from loyalty to the Watchtower, which is not even a fraction true, because the accusations are actually founded in truth. Now, if an ambassador of the Watchtower is allowed to get a United Nations identification card to get access to vital data and to acquire the card through their number one worldly enemy, mind you, pledging allegiance, agreeing to support their cause, to publicize information on their cause, to help them expand their cause, and, you know, like I said, really pledging allegiance to be shaking hands and getting into bed with this organization, then my question is, if they're allowed to do that, why is it that in Malawi the same exceptions could not be made in order for the preservation of life? All those people that were not allowed to follow the laws of the land that were ordered in order to participate in society in Malawi. These Jehovah's Witnesses basically were brutalized and killed for following the Watchtower's rules about not having anything to do with politics, not having anything to do with the military, not pledging allegiance to any worldly organization. These Jehovah's Witnesses were massacred for following those Watchtower and Jehovah Witness rules, because they were not allowed to have anything to do with these organizations, not even take a piece of ID. They were killed. I highly recommend you guys go and look up what happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi, because they followed the Watchtower's instructions. And look at the hypocrisy of how is it that the Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to get this ID and become an NGO to further their initiative and their cause and whatever their motives may be. But these people, when their lives are on the line, are not allowed to make even the slightest hint of an exception to any of the rules of the Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, when the United Nations official Paul Hoeffel wrote to the Watchtower branches the second time in response to the outcry of the witnesses looking for truth on the matter, I'm going to read his letter to you guys. He's just one of many, many, many members that wrote into the Watchtower. Paul explained what was involved in being associated as an NGO. And basically, in a nutshell, one of these members that was appalled with what took place, a Jehovah's Witness member, wrote into the headquarters a very heartfelt message. And he said to him in a nutshell that basically, from his research and understanding, to be an NGO, you had to be in agreement with and alignment with the United Nations mission. And you were becoming an NGO for the sole purpose of advertising their cause. That's what the United Nations teaches. If you want to be an NGO, you have to be prepared to advertise our cause. That's why we allow for this. And of course, the Watchtower, they have taught so adamantly against having any kind of political interference or amalgamation or cooperation at any level with anybody or anything that's political at all. This Paul guy, he just says, you know what, this is my understanding of what being an NGO is. And this has been my upbringing and understanding of who you guys say the United Nations people, like who they are. And what am I missing here? I'm going to read you his letter because he really questions how the Watchtower could have justified having this kind of relationship when they see and advertise the United Nations as being such an enemy to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I'm going to read that to you guys. And he says, you know, I thought they were the scarlet beast. I thought they were going to be, you know, killed in Armageddon. Why is it you're publishing information about them in our magazines in such a favorable light and giving them all this pats on the back and all of this stuff? Something else to think about too that is really interesting. If the United Nations was aware, if they had read all of this information and very derogatory, negative publications about them over many decades, would they have granted this NGO status to the Watchtower? You know, I really doubt it. It's kind of like they're saying, hey, you know, we hate your guts. You are our greatest enemy. God's about to brutally come annihilate all of you and your family. But hey, can you pass the salt? You know, it's kind of like that. They're just, I don't know. I don't think if I was a decision maker in the United Nations, I would be too quick to shake hands with the Watchtower when all they have ever done is written very negatively about me. That's, of course, saying if I was the United Nations, which obviously I'm not. Page 12 of The Shepherd of the Flock states that anyone that participates in any worldly or political matters is to be dissociated from the Jehovah's Witnesses. Any political matters. So my question is, should now the Jehovah's Witnesses disassociate themselves from themselves? They published in Watchtower 1987, September 1st, page 20. The United Nations is actually a worldly confederacy against Jehovah God and his dedicated witnesses on earth. So let me read that again. The United Nations is actually a worldly confederacy against Jehovah God and his dedicated witnesses on earth. They also go on to say, friendship with the world is an enemy with enmity. That's a hard one for me. With God. Then they also say, pay attention to yourselves and all the flock. Page 140, that's the name of the article. In the article, they say, Jehovah's Witnesses maintain neutrality with regard to the political and military affairs of the nations, since true dedicated Christians are no part of the world. If a member of the congregation unrepentantly pursues a course of violation of his Christian neutrality, he thereby disassociates himself from the neutral Christian congregation. So you're basically saying you're allowed no involvement with political or military affairs. And I mean, the United Nations, that's who they are, what they're about. I have a copy of the application that they had to fill out here to become part of the United Nations as a non-governmental organization. This is kind of what the application looks like. They tried to backpedal and say, oh, we didn't realize what we were getting involved in. We didn't even have to sign anything. That's not true. They had to renew and sign their membership every year. So I had mentioned that there was a letter that I was going to read. I don't have that one, but I have this one. And this one is written by Brant Jones. Brant Jones was another individual that was very much heartbroken when he found out about what was taking place. through this organization's involvement with United Nations. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I've just kind of highlighted a whole bunch of parts of what he had to say to the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I really like the humility behind how he expresses himself. He says, "I write this letter to you with great sadness in my heart. I long for the day that I can once again hold up my head with pride as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. I approached Donnie Lane, an elder in my congregation, about 2 weeks ago with information indicating that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society had joined the UN as an NGO in 1991. Of course, he did not believe me. The information I received was that Brother Lush told the circuit overseer that the Watchtower Society had never been and is not currently an NGO associated with the United Nations. This does not square with the information that I previously received from an elder in Texas. It came to my attention about 3 years ago that the Watchtower joined the United Nations as an NGO. At first I didn't believe it, but through the 90s I had noticed a trend in the writings of the magazines and some doctrinal changes that I felt were strange. Then, an elder that I asked about the situation confirmed that the Watchtower did indeed join the United Nations as an NGO, but got out in 2001, 2 days after being exposed by a British newspaper. I was somewhat mortified, but still skeptical about the Society's involvement, but decided to wait on Jehovah. However, last month, what I would normally consider a minor incident finally pushed me over the edge to the point that I am now writing to you, hopefully, for some serious and honest answers to some serious questions. The item that caused me to write to you was an article in Awake. Awake is one of their magazines. I will share the most recent statement in the Awake, which finally made me sick at heart enough to write this letter to you. It is this last page of the May 22nd, 2005 Awake in the article Libraries, Gateways to Knowledge. And then he quotes where they said, "Especially relevant today, then, is the observation of the ancient scholar, writer, and King Solomon, who wrote, 'To the making of many books there is no end, and much devotion to them is wearisome to the flesh.' Ecclesiastes 12:12. When used discerningly, though libraries continue to be what the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organizations calls a local gateway to knowledge." I was heartsick that this religious society that we have served with is so deliberate in quoting from the beastly lover of Babylon the Great that not only does the quote form the title theme of the article, but actually is used to offset the inspired words of Jehovah through Solomon with a contrary expression from the United Nations. Incidentally, this is the second quote in this issue that is from the United Nations. The other one is on page 6. Brothers, this is only one example of the writings that I have noticed since the first hearing about this that makes me sick, because they are presenting the United Nations in such a way as to make it look like a good organization with a good cause and lofty aims, not as the murderous beasts that we have been taught in the past. It has been over a decade since I remember seeing the harlot sitting on the scarlet-colored wild beast with a picture of the UN in the background. I am sure that I don't have to explain to you that an NGO is not what the United Nations. I am sure that I don't have to explain to you what an NGO is, nor what the United Nations requirements are. But by way of reminder, they agree to share the ideals of the UN Charter, have a demonstrated interest in United Nations issues, and proven ability to reach large or specialized audiences, have the commitment and means to conduct effective information programs about United Nations activities by publishing newsletters, bulletins, and pamphlets. And in 1969, a United Nations resolution was issued with the following requirement: The organization shall undertake to support the work of the United Nations and to promote knowledge of its principles and activities in accordance with its own aims and purposes. In our new Organized to Do Jehovah's Will book on page 155, the matter of dissociation is discussed. And I will quote, "For example, a person might renounce his place in the Christian congregation by his actions, such as by becoming part of a secular organization that has objectives contrary to the Bible, and hence is under judgment by Jehovah God. Why do these words apply? Why do not these words apply when even greater force to the society for their adulterous relationship with this horrible, vicious image of the wild beast? Why are we flirting with the beast? Why are we promoting its programs? Why are you saying admiring things about it? It promotes a different view of the United Nations than the view that you have promoted in the past, such as this is a vicious wild beast in the hands of Satan and God's people, and to be avoided, and you should avoid association with it. I will be happy to supply you with full quotes from your publications for the past 12 to 14 years that support my statement above at your request. I have felt like an emissary of the United Nations when I go door to door with these magazines. I really am at a crossroads in my life. For 45 years, I have been one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and 30 of that was as an elder. I have gone to prison for your faith. I have gone to prison for the faith in 1966 to 1988 for my dedicated position of neutrality. Is the society today in any way associated with the United Nations by any other name or corporation through some other entity? If this is true, that you have belonged and supported the United Nations, are you disassociated from Jehovah God and Jesus Christ by your actions? Your response is perhaps one of the most important things in my life. I hope you will lovingly consider that I too love Jehovah and Jesus Christ deeply, and always will, whether I am serving Jehovah with you or without. I hope it is apparent that I have slaved with you for 3/4 of my life, and I so much look forward to an answer that I can look to with joy and pride. Your brother, Brant Jones." So they respond. They respond to Brant Jones, and here's what they have to say. "Dear Brother Jones, we are pleased to reply to your letter of August 14th, where you express your concerns about the Watchtower Society's registration for a few years, downplaying, with the United Nations Department of Public Information as a non-governmental organization. We now have your letter, and frankly, Brother Jones, we are quite disappointed to observe the very critical tone of your letter, especially for one who has been associated with Jehovah's organization for so many years, and who has had opportunity to see how Jehovah has so richly blessed his people. It saddens us to see you begin to draw away from the Christian congregation because you have allowed unfounded doubts to build up in your mind so strongly that you begin to accuse your brothers here at headquarters with unfaithfulness and dishonesty." In other words, they're saying, by now you should know not to question us. You've been with us long enough. Christians cannot become part of the old world around them, but Jesus recognized that they would still be living in the midst of this world and would have to deal with it in various ways as it exists and until Jehovah takes it away. Jehovah has allowed human governments to exist to provide a measure of stability in the world. Okay, so I just want to respond to that. So in their opinion, Jehovah has allowed worldly governments to exist in order to provide a measure of stability in the world. Okay, so if that's true and they believe that, why are they not submitting to that worldly system when they have the Supreme Court and the judicial system imploring them to turn over their database of pedophiles? Why are they not cooperating? Why are they seen through this judicial system to be one of the most rebellious organizations on the face of the earth? Why are they viewed that way? When here they're saying that they see that Jehovah's allowed human governments to exist to provide a measure of stability, why are they not participating in that stability by submitting themselves then to the authorities? Why are they rebelling against the authorities at every turn then? Anyways, I'll continue on. This has permitted Christians to carry on their activities without the burden of complete lawlessness. Interesting. Another thing that I have to say to that is, if they are being instructed through the Jehovah's Witnesses to obey the laws of the land, so there's not complete lawlessness, why were those in Malawi not allowed to do what they had to do to get their ID, to live in society peacefully? Why were they told to be such dissidents that they ended up having to suffer such horrendous and heinous crimes? You know, they're just being complete hypocrites here. They go on to see that, the Jehovah's Witnesses go on to say to Brant Jones, all these human governments, including the United Nations, provide human services for which taxes are paid directly or indirectly, including such things as disease control, agriculture assistance, disaster and famine relief, and many others. Our brothers, especially in economically impoverished lands, benefit from the many of the services. Some of our brothers are government employees, even the United Nations, who provide such human benefits to others without violating their Christian neutrality. Thus, it is not improper or inappropriate to recognize that the United Nations does some commendable things on behalf of the people and to improve conditions on earth, as do other existing governments who are at the same time portrayed in the Bible as beasts and part of Satan's world. So, Brother Jones, our zeal for protecting Jehovah's good name and organization must be kept in balance with what the scriptures teach Christians as to the attitude they should have toward the governments of this world that Jehovah allows to exist for a time. We cooperate with and benefit from such arrangements. If so, turn over the database of pedophiles to the authorities as you have been instructed, so you can continue to cooperate with and benefit from such arrangements. That's what I have to say to the witnesses on that. Okay, so let's continue in their letter. They go on to say, we trust the above comments will be helpful to you. Certainly, there is no basis for the strong assertions you have made in your letters. It is just such issues based on distorted information that the adversary, the devil, oh, surprise, surprise that they're bringing him in here, that the adversary, Satan, the devil, is attempting to use in undermining the faith of Jehovah's people and to cause them to lose confidence in the organization. Couldn't actually be because there's any validity. So just the persecution complex over and over again. Satan is leading you astray. Okay, we urge you, Brother Jones, not to fall victim to Satan's subtle mechanisms. Do not let him rob you of the spiritual heritage Jehovah has for those who prove loyal and faithful to him and who continue to love the brotherhood. You have served Jehovah for many years, done much good work in the congregations, have helped many to come to know Jehovah, including members of your family. What you do now will affect not only your future service to Jehovah, but could also have influence on others, especially on members of your family. So rather than remain stumbled and disgruntled, perhaps by continuing to dwell on these distorted claims of the opposers that only serve to give you a false premise for not returning to happy association with Jehovah's people, we encourage you to pray earnestly and humbly to Jehovah to help you put matters again in proper perspective. Let me paraphrase that last one. Basically, they're saying to him, believe us, and if you don't, you're going to be punished. And we're going to tear your family apart if you don't drop it. And basically, that's what they're saying. If you look at the part where it says, what you do now will affect not only your future service to Jehovah, but could also have an influence on others, especially on members of your family. So drop it or else. That's basically the bottom line there. Threats and coercion for compliance. Their number one strategy. So that's pretty much it. That was the conclusion of the response. So let's just take a quick look at what do they directly teach about the United Nations. And here's one example. They say, they do not appreciate that by being bound together in the United Nations, they are united against God and his kingdom by Christ. In the United Nations, A Better Way from the Awake 1991, page 10, they say, Jehovah's Witnesses firmly believe that the United Nations is going to play a major role in the world events in the near future. No doubt these developments will be very exciting. So to me, there's two ways to interpret this. That in light of everything the Watchtower has said and done, including their 9-year relationship with the United Nations, they, number one, are going to again partner with United Nations. The Jehovah's Witnesses will again partner with United Nations, and part of that is going to bring about the peace that they're talking about. Or in Armageddon, millions will die gruesome deaths according to the previous writings in hundreds of publications, and the United Nations as the Scarlet Beast will be destroyed. What they're saying here is the Jehovah's Witnesses firmly believe that the United Nations is going to play a major role in world events in the very near future. No doubt these developments will be very exciting. The word exciting is the word that's standing out to me and very scary, because the thing that they're expecting to have happen is gruesome, brutal, morbid torture that's about to take place. That is what they have said is going to come at Armageddon. That Jesus is going to come with his armies and torment and kill everybody that's not a Jehovah's Witness in good standing. So when they talk about the things that are to come that are very exciting, that shows me the level of brutality that they really are operating from, because there's nothing exciting. The word exciting should never be used to describe such horrific events, ever. If there's going to be suffering, to me, that nobody should be excited about that. But there are many, many, many times in their writings where they refer to the torture and the annihilation of these enemies of God, or worldly people, or apostates. They refer to these events as being exciting, and that they won't feel compassion when they witness these things. It's really sad the way they talk about them. I'm just going to run through a few examples of where the Watchtower started doing their duty as an NGO and incorporating the United Nations publications into their own, the way that they were instructed to do. This was part of their job description. It was part of the agreement. So the Watchtower announces the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom 1995. You can get this off of jw.org. They quoted from the United Nations, and they said, "We, the peoples of the United Nations," yes, this is in a JW article that they say this. Opening lines, let's just get right into bed with the previous whore of Babylon. They quote, we the peoples of the United Nations determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind." And then it goes on and on and on. And that's a whole big page, basically, where they have taken what the United Nations publishes on their own website and their own articles and literally plugged the whole thing into one of their publications as part of the 50-year United Nations organization. So because United Nations had then been at that point around for 50 years as part of their celebration, In recognition of its accomplishments, the United Nations organization has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize 5 times. Yet the lamentable fact of life is that we still do not live in a world without war. So, I mean, if you go and you look at this, does it not sound like the author's views of the UN is maybe not that of a scarlet beast, a deserving of destruction at Armageddon, but it's more like a resume, like here's all the lovely things that they have done, you know? And it goes on and on. They say, this is once again from their magazine, this widespread feeling of disappointment weighs heavily on the minds of the United Nations officials and adds to their frustration. Yet despite the frustrations, at the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, many seem to have renewed optimism and are hoping for a fresh start. Although acknowledging the shortcomings of the United Nations, Ambassador Albright echoed the sentiments of many when she said, "We have to stop talking about where we've been, and we need to talk about where we're going." Again, this is a very direct and obvious rubbing of shoulders, publicly rubbing of shoulders happening here. Quoting from their information, using them as pivotal resources of data, all show clearly that they are fulfilling their NGO requirement. They go on to say, peace and security cannot exist as long as there are war, poverty, crime, and corruption. The United Nations recently released the following statistics. And then again, they go on and on and on, and they share all the United Nations statistics on war and this and that. And then again, recently, an official of the World Health Organization arranged for a program to educate people about the problem of AIDS. She was invited to the branch office of Jehovah's Witnesses, where she was shown information published in Awake on the subject. She was impressed to see articles that discuss from the Bible the best way to prevent AIDS and how to help infected ones cope with the situation. She observed that Awake, that's their magazine, is in the forefront in providing such information on the subject. So here they're just, in so many ways, they're saying, we are shaking hands with the United Nations. We're doing it publicly. They're in support of us. We're in support of them. I mean, there's nothing more clear than this particular one I was reading from is the Watchtower announcing Jehovah's Kingdom 2006, page 11. Just so many things to say about this. I mean, how can Watchtower deny that they were truly informed as an active NGO when they're literally inviting into their kingdom halls, they're inviting into their buildings what they consider to be this whore beast, welcoming this UN official into the JW branch, welcoming them in and having this teaching service. There's this level of intimacy that they're participating in publicly now. They're not even trying to hide it. Were they not worried about the punishment of Leviticus 21:9, as they teach that they're like literally getting into bed with this whore in front of everybody? The other thing is, how did this public shaking of hands with United Nations not raise some red flags to the present witnesses and those that were participating here? I mean, did they not have concerns with this? And how can Watchtower deny their affiliation with the UN after partaking in such an activity like this? The other thing is, why would the UN be willing to participate in such an activity? Do they not know that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach that they are this whore, this harlot beast? Like, do they not know what is written about them, I have lots and lots more that I was thinking of going into with you guys, but I think the best thing at this point is if you go on to the jw.org website, you can do a search for United Nations, NGO, UN, and you can read from way back to present. You can read pretty much everything that the Jehovah's Witnesses have published about who they say the United Nations are, and you can watch the progression of around the time they developed this relationship with them, how their whole position on them changed to the point that they were inviting them now into their buildings, and they were publishing their materials in their own materials. It's really obvious. So I think instead of going through, I mean, I've got tons of pages like this, tons and tons of pages where I'm just reading off more and more and more United Nations materials that were woven into the Awake magazines and the Watchtower literature, Watchtower magazine. But there's not a point of me reading them all. You guys can just go and read them. There's tons of them, though. I'm just going to see if any are essential, because I don't think you guys need to hear every single one of these. An interesting one in Awake 1972. In the eyes of God, the UN represents this world's defiance of Him and the heavenly government He has established to rule this earth. So yeah, to Watchtower, the United Nations are, I'll just read this part. They will trust no longer in the religious men. This is taken from Man's Salvation Out of World Distress at Hand, page 247 to 248. They will trust no longer in religious men, whom they once regarded as gods, as having connections with the supreme, or the superhuman spirit realm, one of the mountain-like organizations in which they will take refuge is the United Nations, the eighth power, for the symbolic wild beast with its 10 horns will destroy Babylon the Great. And I mean, it goes on. And the wild beast, Satan's worldwide political system, was caught, and along with it the false prophet that performed in front of it the signs with which he misled those who received the mark of the beast and those who render worship to its image, the United Nations. So I say you guys really just go do your own homework on these matters. Ask yourself, was or was not the Watchtower an NGO? What does it matter? What does it mean? Why was it kept secret? Why was it canceled the second it was brought to light? And how does their association with the United Nations fly in the face of everything they have taught about the Scarlet Beast, about neutrality, about the consequences of non-neutrality? How many lives have been lost to, being tortured or martyred because of this concept of neutrality? The political arena has now become one of the most common topics in Watchtower literature, even though they claim as one of their chief tenets of faith and doctrine is to have nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with this world. Yet barely one magazine can be published where they do not have clear political agenda, including taking information from the United Nations and directly inserting it into their magazines like their marketing material for them. So you really want to think about this false teaching and claim of neutrality, because they themselves, as the leadership of this organization, they don't submit to that doctrine whatsoever. They're very politically charged. And like I said, JWs are not even allowed to be members of the YMCA because they consider it an act of apostasy, but they're allowed to be an NGO. I have a whole bunch of pages, like I said, that were taken from Awake magazines, where you can see how favorably they're advertising things to do with the United Nations. This here, it's not a big one, but it's basically a whole page dedicated to the United Nations. I'm going to give you guys a few more where you can actually see their logo and everything right in the Jehovah's Witness publications. Let me see here. Yeah, this video would have been like 2 hours long because I had over 100 sheets of highlights, like just hundreds of these pages. I didn't realize I had so much on this. I should have done a whole series on just this subject alone. But I just want to show you guys the last couple. Tons and tons and tons and tons. Okay, I'm starting to get into them now. Let me see here where we begin. Okay, so about here. Here's one. If you look at this right here, that's the United Nations icon or logo. And this is taken from their magazine, where they're basically giving a whole page regarding Miss Roosevelt holding the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This whole page was dedicated to the United Nations in a very positive light. Here's their lobbying for volunteers for the United Nations, part of their job requirement as an NGO in this one here. They're asking for, right here it says, United Nations volunteers states that viewed globally, the need for increased volunteer efforts is greater today than ever. So basically they're recruiting for the United Nations, asking Jehovah's Witnesses, people reading the magazine, to volunteer for the United Nations to help them out. And again, here you can see their logo. This is another whole page dedicated to the International Year of Volunteers. So once again, they're fulfilling their NGO duties. Yeah, I think that's about it. I don't think I have any more major ones for you guys to look at. You guys can go in. This is all public on their website. That's where I got this stuff. You guys can look at it for yourselves. Yeah, and it'd be really interesting for you guys to read the Guardian, actually, the article that was written about them. It says, sect accused of hypocrisy over association with organization it has demonized. A former member said, there is a glaring inconsistency which has emerged between the WTBTS frequent portrayal of the UN as an evil organization and its behind-the-scenes attempts to curry favor with that organization. Were individual members to be aware of any formal link, they would be devastated. But by no stretch of the imagination could the WTBTS be considered to share the ideals of the UN Charter unless you suppose that destruction of the UN by God is consistent with that charter. It's a really interesting article, which you guys should go and read. Like I said, I have over 100 pages of material that I had set aside just to talk about this United Nations affiliation with the Watchtower organization. So I'm not going to go through all of that because we're almost at an hour already, and I definitely had at least another hour of material that I could cover. So a couple questions to ask. If this is just in retrospective summarizing all of this, you can see that without a shadow of a doubt, they have changed their position on the United Nations. They went from literally saying they're going to be destroyed as the scarlet whore and beast to being their voice and publishing their material and trying to recruit and send volunteers to them. And just, I mean, very, very clear relationship going on between them now, where 50 years ago they were considered to be enemies. So the question is, if so many policies have changed and doctrines have changed and beliefs have changed and positions on things that were held to be like really foundational doctrines, if those things have changed over the years, in their opinion, to better serve Jehovah, like now they're allowed to take organ transplants, and black individuals are now allowed to serve as elders where they weren't before, or even to go on to being in the governing body. Why are they allowed to change so many things? But there's one thing that they're not allowed to change, and this is the one that concerns me the most, because it's, like I said, it was the first video I did for a reason. Why are they not allowed to change the two testimony rule as it applies to protecting children from child sex abuse? Why can't they change that one? Because think about how many lives are being affected by that. How many lives are being destroyed because of that one doctrine. Why can't they change that? That's my question. They can change everything else. They can say that the United Nations are the enemy of God, and then they can get into bed with them and say, no, just kidding. They're great. They're lovely. Look at all the awesome things they do. You want to volunteer for them? They're allowed to do that. They can easily do that. No one even had to ask them to do that. They did it kind of in secret. Why are they not allowed to do something like change the two-witness rule that makes it that the only way a child is allowed to be protected from the predator that's abusing them is if there was a witness present that witnessed the abuse? Why are they not allowed to change that? Why can't they change the rule that says that they're not allowed to present evidence to the courts when it's being requested of them as to who's committing these offenses? Why can't they surrender the database of pedophiles? Why can't they do that? Why can't they make that little change and adjustment? And look at all the good that would come from it. That's the thing I'm confused about. Why the hypocrisy? Why can they change things that don't even need to be changed, and then the things that must be changed, that the law is ordering that they change, they completely ignore? They won't have no part in it. So that's what I'm wondering. The other thing is, and lastly, and I know I've said this already, if they can change things so often from such extremes, one end to the other, yet they are the only voice of God on this earth, what does that say? Is that possible? Is it possible that they are the mouthpiece of God, yet in one moment God is telling them that the United Nations is a scarlet whore and beast and going to be, killed in Armageddon, and in the next moment God is saying, get into bed with them and recruit as many people into that as you possibly can, because they're amazing. Look at all these lovely things they do. I mean, is that really what God's character would be? To be so adamantly opposed and then so in favor of the exact same organization? I mean, to me, I don't know, the answer is pretty simple. But anyways, this was video 9, and stay tuned for the last one in this series, where we are going to cover, I don't even know, there's probably about 100 questions. We're just going to fire them off. I found a ton of questions online through Google and YouTube. The top questions being searched, information that is being searched by individuals that are looking for answers regarding the Watchtower and the Jehovah's Witness organization. I have put together a huge list of them, and I'm just going to give quick, one-sentence answers to answer those questions based on the information that I found in all of my research. So that's about it. Hopefully you guys will stick around for video number 10, the last one in this series. Thanks so much, guys.